Hi everybody, welcome to VTS40. That's 40. I have more VTSs than I have birthdays. That's pretty cool. Anyways, VTS stands for Video Tutorial Service. For you folks who are new to this, welcome aboard. For those of you who have been around for a while, as always, thanks for sticking around. Because I'm sure I give you plenty of reasons not to. Anyways, it's this, unless you're like downloading it really late or buying it as a back issue, lo, these many years hence. This is for June 2008. Yes, indeed. I'm your host, Keith. I'm sorry, there's nobody prettier. You got to look at this ugly face the whole time. It's pretty bad. Anyhow, we're continuing our conversation on body mechanics and my particularly kind of messed up, screwed up way of looking at body mechanics through the lens of energy. Pow. Yeah, like energy. All right. Energy is one of those things that it flows. That's, there's this old Donald Graham thing. Donald Graham was a teacher at Disney long time ago, and at the Chouinard Art Institute, which then became Cal Arts. Okay. Anyways, he would come in and teach life drawing and all these other various things to the old school animators. This is 50 some odd years ago, and he would say, draw forces, not forms. Okay, animate forces, not forms. Okay, and what that means is you find the energy. What he was basically saying is you find the energy inside of what's happening in the character, and you draw and you animate that. Okay, you don't animate a hand mover from here to here. All right, that's very CG mindset actually. You don't animate fingers doing something. You animate the energy of it. What's the energy right here? Well, it's a light flighting energy. Okay, so you find a way to do that. You don't animate a hip and a shoulder doing this. You animate the force of something moving through. Okay, and so changing lines of action is a way of describing how to animate force. Okay, you got a line of action. Let's say we're going to get ready to push something, so the line of action is curving up through this way, and what the changing of the line of action is the application of the force. Okay, so now the line of action is this way. And the greater the change of the line of action, the more force there is. Well, the way he's saying force, I'm saying energy. Okay? Energy, to kind of recap, is the way things move. Okay? You cannot move anything without energy. Apply no energy, and this is what you get. No energy, nothing. Okay? Well, energy is one of those things you kind of have to there's latent energy, and then there's energy that's in motion, latent and kinetic. Well, your kinetic power, the expression of your energy, is only as strong as the energy as it's stored up and released. Okay, and an object has a certain amount of energy in it, especially if it's a fuel. Okay, let's take a look at gasoline. All right, something that's getting rather expensive in the world today. Gasoline has a certain amount of energy stored inside of its mass. Okay, and the way you release that energy is to burn it. All right, now you can burn it rather quickly. Boom, it's an explosion, and a lot of energy is released and pushes things out of the way and knocks things over. Okay, or you can release it a little bit at a time, and by parceling off a little bit. And really, gasoline has a way of burning rather quickly. Boom. So what we do to make our cars go is we say, well, let's take a little bit of gasoline and let's put it inside of a cylinder, and boom. And inside this engine cylinder, the little explosion pushes a piston. All right, that's what's happening inside of an internal combustion engine. So a little bit of gasoline, pow. Well, what does that piston do? Well, it pushes a crankshaft. What does the crankshaft do? Well, it turns the wheels, and the wheels turn and makes me go down the road. Okay, so the store of energy in a little bit of gasoline, when released, allows good things to happen, in moving down the road. If we put something that doesn't have quite as much energy stored in it into the gas tank, like say chocolate milk, you're not going to get very much out of it. In fact, chocolate milk, the boiling point is very high. The application of energy to the chocolate milk is so high that it doesn't work. Okay, one of the things you find with gasoline is you need a little tiny bit of energy, a spark plug, a little spark, tiny little piece of electricity, tiny little electricity, a little bit of gas, boom, causes it to blow up. All right. Why did I go into all that conversation? Well, it's the same thing with our bodies. That's the whole concept of anticipation. Anticipation is building up the energy, storing it, and then releasing it. Okay? If I only build it up a little bit, then the release can't be as big. And whenever that's out of balance, our eyes catch it. We catch it easily, instantly, without even knowing why. You know, if we take, for instance, a guy is going to lean against a box, okay? It's a big, giant box. And if he leans against it and the box slides, what do we think of the box? It's rather light, okay? Now let's say the guy is going to pick up the box. And if he just bends over, doesn't even bend over that much, he picks it up with his arms, no real energy, no real anticipation, no build-up of energy, he just picks it up, we think it's rather light, okay? If he's going to lift something or do something, the amount that he builds up his energy tells us how heavy it's going to be. All right, it gives us a cue, an idea of what's going to happen. All right, if he's building up energy in a really big way, we're expecting it's going to take all of that energy expressed to make something move. Okay, and in VTS40, I described it as like, you know, hydropower, building up water and then letting it run down. Okay, building it up and then breaking the dam and letting it all run down. I recap this just because I feel like I need to kind of reground where we're at. Last video, VTS39, we talked about the concept of energy as applied to gravity, okay? And really got into it and broke it down into a couple things. In this one, we're going to be talking about inertia. Okay, what is inertia? Inertia is basically the tendency of objects in motion to remain in motion, or the objects that are still to remain still, okay? Inertia could be thought of as a way of things staying the same, okay? Now, things staying the same, if I'm standing still here and somebody comes along and bumps me, all right, there's a certain amount of inertia there. The inertia is I don't want to be moving because I'm still. Something bumps me and it doesn't make me fly the fastest right away. There's a certain build up to it and things go. And you notice parts of me move first, other parts go second, and then follows through, okay? The second part of inertia is once things are moving, they want to keep moving, and it requires some kind of energy to make them stop, okay? So it takes energy applied to a still object to make it move, and it takes energy applied to an object in motion to make it stop. Look at this as an example. A great way to look at this is in space, okay? Out in space, there's no gravity, all right? We're just floating. There's no air. Okay, so there's nothing to make us drag or stop. So no air, no gravity, nothing in the way. And you can go out there and you're like this, and you can move around all you want. There's nothing to push against, so you can do all these things with your arms and your legs. You can't swim, you're just there. Okay, your piece of mass is just in space, right? Floating. Nothing you can do makes you move. You need some kind of energy release to do that, all right? Now there's energy built up inside of us, but not very much, and we're used to applying it. Our way we're built is through our legs and through our arms. We use gravity to our advantage in the firmness of Earth, so we use a lot of power in our legs. That's how we express our energy mostly. But in space, nothing. So I'm sitting there in space, and along comes, I don't know, a flying toaster. Now the flying toaster bumps into me, bonk. Now I'm floating. The flying toaster is a small little object, so if it bonks me, it's not going to move me very much, all right? Because there's not enough mass, there's not enough energy stored inside that thing. It's not very big. Now let's say the space shuttle comes along and bumps me, bonk. Away I go, all right? Because there's a lot of energy in that mass being applied to a tiny little piece of me, all right? But objects in motion are the same way. Once I'm going, there's nothing gonna stop me in space. Nothing. Until I come into some gravitational pull of another object that can pull me in. But gravity is an energy, remember, VTS39. But say if I'm out there, nowhere near anything, and along comes a toaster, bumps into me, I'm going to keep moving this way forever. The same speed, and nothing will ever slow me down. Because in space, there's no application of any other energy to stop me. So in space, stillness is perfectly represented, the inertia of stillness. Nothing I do can make me move until there's energy applied, boink. And once I'm in motion, the second part of inertia, the object moving, is going to keep moving until energy is applied to stop it. Now, let's say I got myself little, squirters, little air squirters, you know, compressed air cans. I can now make myself move and stop myself. And that's how they steer and move spaceships up in space. They got these little jet packs, tiny, tiny little things on the spaceship, you know, like the space shuttle or the satellite or whatever. And that's how they steer it. That's how they move it. It's up there. And they just go, and it makes it move. And they're like, okay, that's far enough. And it stops it. So that's, energy is necessary to get something moving. Energy is necessary to get something to stop. Okay, how does that apply to us in body mechanics? All right, remember last time we talked about the COPAG or the COPAG. You know, we have the center of gravity, which I thought is, and I still think is kind of a poor description of what's going on in our bodies when we say, what's the center of gravity? I call it the center of power against gravity. Okay, oftentimes when we're standing, it's in our hips. So, let's say we're going to, and then inside of us, because of gravity in our muscles, we have the ability to apply our internal energy to the ground and do things. Okay, if I want to move, I push with this right foot. You know, I'm here and I push with the right foot, and by pushing with the right foot, I'm pushing away from my hips. Okay, so the center of the power against gravity is from my hips, and the leg is pushing the ground away from my hips, but the ground doesn't give, so my hips move. Okay, so it's kind of an inverse kinematics. You ever wondered where that came from? Now you know. All right, so you push, and we're pushing away from our hips against the earth, but the earth isn't moving, so our hips move instead because it's lighter. And that's how we move around. So that's the application of energy. The energy is stored up inside of me, and I push. Now, it's very difficult to just stand still and push away because there's not much flexion room. I mean, I could try it, but it just doesn't work too well. To really move, I have to kind of build up the energy, and then I can push it away. By building up the energy, I'm anticipating going the opposite direction of the move I want to go. All right? So I do this, and then I push away. That's the build-up and release of energy. Inertia, what does that have to do with the rest of it? Well, inertia applies itself through the connections. Okay? The application of energy from the center of power against gravity, at least internal moves. We'll talk about external moves in a second, but internal energy application, meaning my muscles, my body doing what it wants to do and using the ground or other objects as kind of taking that energy and applying it to those things in order to move away from them. Okay, the biggest example of that is pushing away with the legs against the earth to move our bodies forward. All right. Well, in order to do that, we need to kind of, the application of inertia is you have to build up the energy and release it. And there's a certain velocity thing involved here, okay? The first aspect of this velocity is that something that's still, unless it's super, super light, does not reach maximum velocity instantaneously. Velocity is ramped up, okay? That's the graph on that is that you ramp up energy, you ramp up velocity, and the closer to stillness you are, the lower that velocity is, and then once it's moving, that application of the energy is now in full effect. Now to slow down, it's the opposite. The velocity is high while the object's still in motion, all right? The object's still in motion, the velocity is high, but now you want to slow it down. We have to apply energy against that. So let's say I push away, and gravity's going to pull me down, so I got to use my left leg to catch myself. Okay? So I push away with the right, and my velocity at first is rather slow, then I go very fast, and then gravity, and then I slow down at the top. This is from VTS39, and then gravity starts to take over, and my velocity picks up. Okay? So as the application of the energy is higher towards 100%, it comes in, and now I got to use the left leg to catch myself, but it doesn't stop right away. It kind of has to catch it and apply that energy against the ground in order to kind of slow me down and stop me. Okay? So velocity is highest. I'm sorry, I should put this in a way that makes sense. When an object is still and energy is applied, velocity is slowest immediately after the energy is applied. Okay? And an object in motion, inertia of an object in motion, the velocity is the highest the immediate moment that energy is applied to stop it. Okay? And you can take a look at the graphs here and see the charts, and you know, I'll kind of repeat that in a certain way so it kind of makes sense. When you move something that's trying to be, that is still, that inertia says velocity, immediately the moment you try to apply energy to it, the velocity is the lowest. All right? Now, once the object's in motion, the velocity is what it is. Now, when you want to try and stop that object in motion, the velocity is the highest the moment you immediately apply energy to stop it. Okay? And that's something you have to keep in mind. So when you're moving from stillness, velocity is the lowest when energy is first applied. When you're moving, velocity is highest when energy is first applied. Then you think, okay, all right, this makes sense. But these are things that you know just by observing it, but it helps you understand how to make something move. Okay? Ask yourself a simple question. Is it still? Okay, then I understand how to apply velocity to it. All right? Is it already in motion? Then I understand how to apply velocity to it. And this really comes in handy when we're talking about things like overlap, overlapping action, or, the successive breaking of joints, and that whole chain reaction inside of us. Okay? And that's really the trickiest part of inertia. Okay, the successive breaking of joints, this overlapping action. This is really tricky. Some people have a real hard time understanding how to do this. And you know what? If you eyeball it, and you keep eyeballing, and after a while you develop your eye, you can kind of see it, and you have a general idea of how to do things so that it doesn't, look like total crap. But a lot of times we don't really understand what we're doing. This is something that I know for myself for a long time. The only way I can get anything overlapping to look good was to just sit there, tweak, play a blast, tweak, preview, tweak, preview, tweak, preview, tweak, preview, tweak, preview, tweak. And it was so frustrating. You can spend hours just trying to get something to move the right way. And you're like, God dang it. And so we try something different, and we float around like, I don't know what I'm doing. All right? That's what we do. Well, then I started thinking about terms of energy, and there was somebody who described to me that it's a follow-through. I'm like, follow-through? For some reason, follow-through connected with me. I'm like, oh, it follows through the same vector of motion. I'm like, all right. Well, let's get into this. Let's just use my torso as an example. Center of power against gravity is my hips. Okay, the thing about follow through, or this overlapping action, these things apply regardless. The way the kind of the rules, the principles I'm going to talk about here work the same regardless if the motion is an internally applied motion or an externally applied motion. Okay? What's an internally applied motion? My body, my energy, my muscles pushing against earth or pushing against other objects to make something happen. Okay? The most common thing is walk or anything like that. Oftentimes the center of power against gravity is our hips, and it pushes away. Okay? Or it does whatever it's going to do. But there's external motion. Okay, so I'm standing here and somebody throws a brick and hits me in the head. Well, where's the power against motion going to start from? My hips? Somebody hits me in the head with a brick and I do this? No, it doesn't feel right. Okay? Somebody hits me in the head with a brick, my head goes first, and then everything else follows. Okay, so it's like, bam! Okay? That's what you get. So the center of power against gravity on an external sense of motion is wherever that energy is applied to. Okay, somebody hits me in the side, it goes bam, like this. Okay, wherever that energy is applied on the body or the object, that's going to move first. Okay, that's the center of power against gravity. Whether that's an internal motion, my muscles, my body deciding to do something, or an external application of energy. All right, internal moves, external moves, it doesn't really matter. Internal moves, figure out where the power is coming from, what motion is. We talked about this in VTS39. External ones, just find out what's getting hit. Okay? So if I get hit in the head, boom, the center of power against inertia and against gravity in this instance, especially on these moves that are sideways, it's the center of power against inertia because my head's still. Okay? It's not going anywhere. So inertia says an object in stillness tends to stay still. Now all of a sudden you need energy applied to make my head move. Doink! All right. I can apply it externally by throwing a brick. Doink, my head moves. Where's the center of power against inertia? My head. Why? Because that's where the energy was applied to make my still head move. Make sense? Okay. Let's say I'm going to move it internally. I'm going to move my head. Well, I can do this. Well, where's the power coming from? Well, generally around in here. Okay. but I'm not moving anything else. So that's a pretty simplistic move. Let's say I'm going to move my head, I want to move my head over this way. Well, I can try and do this, but I'm not moving my head I'm not going to take my nose from here to here, okay? I can do this with my head, but it's not doing anything. To do that, I have to move something more. Like I can move my torso, all right? Or I can move my hips. Either way, I have to do something in my body to move something besides my head to get it over here. All right, let's say if that's going to be applied from the hips. Well, then there's this lag thing going on, all right? It's more pronounced when I want it to be. But if I'm going to move just myself over here, and you study that, there is a little bit of a lag there, all right? The hips are moving first, and then things are kind of falling behind and then falling into place. And if a brick hits my head, doink, my head moves first, then to my shoulders and my hips. Okay, so it's bam. Okay? That's something, the principles of overlap or follow-through are the same. Wherever that center of power against inertia is applied, that's going to move first. That's where all the motion originates. Okay? What do we do with things that are then connected to that particular piece? Let's talk about an internal move first. Okay, the internal move of I want to turn. Okay, I want to move and I want to turn. Or I want to move in that direction and I want to do it in such a way that I'm not really slow and I want to be decisive about it. So I'm going to anticipate a little bit this way because I have to build up the energy. Okay, and then I push off and I turn. Okay, so I build up the energy and then push off with the right leg and turn. The center of power against gravity and inertia in this instance is my hips. Okay, I move it, build up that power, and then from the hip I push away from the hip against the earth, and that's where I'm going. Okay, connected to my hips is this whole long spine thing. I have a secondary area of weight up here in the shoulders. It's very heavy. You got a lot of muscle. Some people have more than others. You have a lot of bone up here. You have the rib cage. So that's a second piece of weight. And then the other piece of weight after some more thin connecting stuff in the neck is a head, a skull with a brain. Some people, again, have more than others. And hair. Some have a lot more than others. And anyways, the idea here is you have primary weight, secondary weight, third weight. Okay, but the weights are all connected. Think of them as links in a chain. Okay, the first link is the hips. The second link is the shoulders and this upper torso. And the third link is the head. But there are links in between them. So we got multiple parts connected. Okay, it's not just the hips, the shoulders, and the head. There's also the spine. Okay, but the spine is made up of a bunch of little links. All right, you think about that. Each vertebrae is a link. And then the neck is also like a link. But you can kind of break this down into pieces. And depending on how slinky or how slender your character is or how stocky they are, depends on, how loose or rigid those things are, okay? But that whole thing is a connection. And it's easy to say the end follows the beginning, but there are certain things, it gets tricky once something is moving and then it has to move back, okay? This is where people really get messed up on follow-through or overlap, is because they don't understand the inertia of something that's in motion going against something else. Okay, so here's a couple of principles that might help you understand how to break down a move, all right? The first principle is, the closer the link is, and a link is any part of the object that is flexible, okay, in this instance, the shoulder is the start, this is, okay? The closer something is to the point of the center of power against inertia or gravity or whatever it is, the center of power, the closer it is, the more immediate or the less delay there is in it moving, okay? So, in this instance, again, using my hips and my chest, since it's easy to describe this way, the hips move first. The thing that's closest to it is going to move with the least amount of delay. All right? So the lower lumbar spine area, when the hips move, that goes with it. But you notice other parts up here staying behind. All right? So the inverse of that is the farther away from the power, the more the delay. Okay? So think about that. The closer to the power of motion, the more immediate the movement, the smaller the delay. Okay? The farther away from the power, the greater the delay. Makes sense? Okay, it helps. Now, what does that mean? Well, you have the successive delay going through each joint. or going through each link in the chain. Okay, so if the one closest to the power has the smallest delay, and the one farthest away from the power has the greatest delay, then what you can do is you can start breaking out how much of a delay is each link along the way. Now, that sounds cool. It gets a little tricky once you start changing the weight of things. Okay, if any chain in the middle is heavier, it is going to have a requirement of more energy. So it's going to add to the delay. Okay, think about this. Let's back it up and take a look at it. The lighter any link is, the less its delay is. Okay, relative to its position in the chain. So if my lumbar is, it's already got a very, very small delay, but if it's light, it's got like next to no delay whatsoever. All right, because the lighter the chain, the link in that chain is, the less its delay. The closer it is to the power of motion, the less the delay is. So if you have something light right next to the power of motion, the delay pretty much doesn't exist, or it's very imperceptible. It's like we don't even notice it. All right, but if the whole chain is light, then what we're going to get is the delay is rather small throughout the whole chain. Okay, and that's good to know, at least from a point of stillness. But even in a point of motion, the lighter something is, the less the delay is. So if my head's really light, then even though it's delayed from the hips, if it's light, it's not going to take as much energy because the mass is smaller. It's not going to take as much energy to get it moving. All right? The inverse of this is true as well. All right? The heavier the link is, i.e. the more mass it has, the more energy it requires to get it to move. Therefore, the delay is greater. All right? So if my head were really, really heavy, like big, fat, giant head, okay? I had a big, giant head, and I move it, the delay in my head is going to be really big, and then it's going to be going, okay? But if my head's really light, you don't barely even see a break in that link, because it doesn't require as much energy, and it more easily goes with the object pulling it, okay? And each link above it in the chain pulls that. So the center of power is the hip, it pulls it. The lumbar is the next chain, because it's the next link in the chain, because it's closer to the power of movement. It has very little delay. It pulls on the chest, okay? The chest is kind of heavy, so there's going to be a bit more delay here because it has more weight. So the power is going to delay a little bit more. But the thing pulling it is the hips through the lumbar spine, okay? The lumbar spine is what's pulling it. And then the neck has its thing, but what's pulling the neck is the shoulders, because the shoulders are being pulled by the lumbar spine, being pulled by the, it just goes down the chain. So is my head being pulled by my hips? Yes, in a hierarchical parental sense, but what's really pulling at my head is my neck being pulled by this, by blah, 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 okay? It helps you understand how to break something down. So the delay is variable, okay, depending on its position in the chain, relative to the position of the power of movement, and relative to its weight compared to everything else. Okay, it's all relative. It's kind of like a family reunion. Okay, there's another principle applied here, and that is the stiffness of the flexibility of the chain itself. Okay, now the torso is fairly flexible, but it requires a lot of energy to get that to flex. Okay, a lot of muscles are necessary to get it moving. A chain just dangling down by itself is very, very loose. Okay, there's little friction in the links. There's little holding those links in place. With the spine, you got all kinds of muscles and tendons and all those things kind of holding it straight up, so that it allows us to stand. All right, because of all that support structure around it, it's a fairly inflexible chain. Okay, it's very flexible relative to a lot of things, but compared to, say, a chain that you use to hang a swing with, it's very rigid compared to that. Okay, now a hand, there's not as much stuff holding it together. One, there's fewer links, and two, the links have fewer things in them. Now there's muscles around it, and the more muscular I am, the stiffer, the less flexible this is going to be. That's why you see these muscle builders, they're like this. It's because their chain is so constrained by all their muscles, it's not very flexible anymore. And they're like, hand me the salt. and they reach for the salt and they can barely move their arms. You know, it doesn't bend. Because their chain is so constrained with all these different things, the flexibility is gone. All right, someone like me who's wimpy and has no muscles, I used to have muscles when I was younger, but not anymore. It's fairly loose. Most people's arm chains are fairly loose. Okay, so the amount of delay, and you're actually seeing this, the amount of delay in the motion is affected by the flexibility of the chain. Here we go. And it works on a link basis, okay, because flexibility changes throughout a chain for the most part. It's very rare for the chain to have every link have the same amount of tension or flexibility. Some parts of it are more flexible than others. All right? It's helpful to know that. But let's take a look at the principle at work here. The less flexible the chain is, the less the delay is in the motion. Okay? The more flexible the chain is, the greater the delay in the motion. Okay? So we got these three things applied to delay. Okay? And that's really what follow through is how much is a part, is this part delaying from the motion. All right? You've got proximity to the power of motion, or the center of power. You have weight relative to the center of power and all these other things. And the last thing you have is the flexibility of the chain. Those three together combine to determine how much something is delayed. And really all we're trying to figure out with on overlap against inertia is this idea of how much something is delayed, because that's really all it is. All right? Another principle that's really good to understand is when it comes to overlap. The vector of motion of the power of movement is applied the same to the whole chain. Okay? What does that mean? If my hips move perfectly straight left to right, then everything in the chain is going to move perfectly straight left to right. Now, if it doesn't move left to right, or if it kind of dips down, if you take this thing and it kind of dips down and goes like that, that's because it's connected. It's too flexible, and so it has to, it's constrained by what's above it in the chain. Okay? So the hips can go straight across, but the head might do this. It might go down and then straight across. All right? The reason why it goes down is because that distance, the length of the chain, doesn't change. Okay? And so as the chain, let's do this. As the chain pulls away, it can't grow. What happens is if this elbow goes straight across, it just the chain has to be what it is. And so what happens is the tip goes like this, but it still goes across. Okay? A vector of motion is as if you took the object, okay, this chain, and you drew a line right through it. Which way is it moving? That way. Okay, why is it moving that way? Because that's the way the hips are moving. Now, if I move anticipation-wise, if I go this way, then the chain is going to go this way first. And then if I move the hips this way, then the chain will go that way second. All right, and unless the chain is extremely flexible, the chain always maintains its length. All right? You can really get a lot of fun things with it if you change the length of the chain. But the thing you have to remember is the vector of the motion, of the power, is the same. It's applied all the way across. The biggest thing that this applies to a lot of times is the end of the chain. I see this all the time. All the time, all the time, all the time. The hips move from right to left. Okay? They move from right to left. But what happens is, as they do that, people start to get pretty clever with the end of the chain, like the head, and the head pops left to right. And it looks really poppy. Okay? And I'll give you an example of that. As you watch this little clip, you'll see that it feels poppy because the power of movement is going left to right, but the end chain, we'll call it the head at the end of the chain, is going left to right at first and then from right to left. Okay? There is nothing in the power of movement going left to right. So the head can't move left to right. If it pops left to right on its own, it feels wrong. All right? So what you want to do is whatever the motion is of that power, that center of power, that's the only motion you can apply to the rest of the chain. All right? How do you handle that? Well, you just generally pull away from it. Okay? Now, if it's got an anticipation, it goes the other way, then, okay, now we have a reason for the head to go left to right, and then it delays and it goes right to left. All right? You have to understand that. You can't have something move the other direction for no reason. All right? It's really important to remember. All right, now that's all good from something starting to something in motion. Where we really get caught up in trouble is when something's in motion and we want to reverse its direction. All of the same rules apply. The only difference is who is done first and who is done second, who is done third, and all these other things. The length of the chain being fixed causes a lot of things to whip, and the path of motion can be pretty crazy. But the principles apply the same, okay? So object moves from right to left. The closest object in the chain, the closest link in the chain moves right to left with the least amount of delay. So when the object then moves from left back to right, the closest link has the least amount of delay. Okay, when the object's moving from right to left, the last link in the chain has the greatest amount of delay. So it's going to be waiting to move for some time. Then once it's in motion, and inertia is back in play. Now, in order for it to change direction, we have to change the direction of the power of motion. Okay, and that's that center of gravity, that center of this motion. So this thing moves right to left, and then it slows down, and now the energy is being applied the other direction. Okay, so as it slows down, and then it goes the other direction, the velocity increases. Okay, remembering, the velocity is least when the energy is first applied to an object in motion. All right, and then it comes to a stop, and then the velocity is the least when it's still now, if only for a microsecond, and now the energy is applied against it, so the velocity ramps up. Okay, so you get slows down and then goes back out. Well, you're going to have the same thing in every single link. Okay, you're going to have first link slows down and goes back up. Right? Same motion. Second link, same thing, slows down and then goes back up. The only difference is it's delayed. All right. The only thing that makes this really tricky is when the chain is of a fixed length, because then it gets really weird on us. We're like, okay, well now the end of the chain. The harder the stuff is when the more flexible or the greater the delay of the chain, okay, or the more weight there is at the end of the chain. It gets very, very hard to do, because sometimes what happens is you get something and it whips over, all right? And what happens is the shortness or the fixed length of the chain changes the vector of motion, which is really, really hard to do. But if you take a ball, a real heavy ball at the end of a chain, and you start moving it back and forth, what happens is after a while the ball starts going up and coming back down. It doesn't go left to right in a nice arc anymore. Now it's getting thrown up because the change of motion, because of the thing, it's not done with its movement yet, so it's swinging left to right, but the delay is so much that the chain's fixed length now is the primary motivator against it, because we still have the center of power moving, but the ball is so heavy it can't even finish its move when it's getting jerked the other way. When that happens, a lot of times things change vectors. All right, that stuff's really hard to do. That one, unless you're going to sit there and figure it out with a physics thing, that one you kind of have to go, all right, let's eyeball this, or let's use a plugin that does it with the physics inside of graphics, CG. All right, it's really hard to do. I'm not going to pretend that it isn't. When you get something like that, when you have a real heavy weight that's really delayed on a very flexible thing, those are the hardest ones to do, because the delay is so much that it almost looks like the motion of that last object in the chain is completely independent of the originating motion. There's no way to make that simple. At least none that I know. I don't know of any quick little trick that makes that simple. Okay? So those are the concepts here that we're talking about with regard to inertia. All right, go over these things real quick. Inertia is the tendency of an object in stillness to remain still, or an object in motion to be moving. Okay, it requires the center of power against inertia is wherever the energy is applied, whether it's internal energy or external energy. Okay, the speed or the velocity of motion is the least whenever the energy is applied, okay, initially. Whether that is in motion or in stillness, the velocity is slowest when the energy is first applied. When an object is in motion, the velocity is fastest when that energy is first applied. Okay? That's because if you go back to VTS39, it's that tug of war thing going on here. The tug of war of energy versus, in this case, it's not energy versus gravity. It's energy versus motion or versus stillness. Okay? But the same concept applies. All right? Just turn it from gravity, turn it on its side. All right? Same idea. So that's velocity. Then comes the overlapping things. All right? We got our couple of principles there. The closer the link is to the object that is originating the motion, that power of motion, the closer it is, the less the delay. The farther away it is, the greater the delay. Okay? The heavier that link is, the greater the delay. All right? The lighter that link is, the less the delay. And the more flexible that chain is, the greater the delay. The less flexible the chain is, the lower the delay. All right? So these are some things that I think they help me understand when I'm sitting there, I'm trying to break down, okay, this overlapping action thing. I sit down and think, okay, closest, farthest, heaviest, lightest, how flexible is it? And once I understand that, then I can start to say, oh, okay, because you can kind of hack your way through it. Okay, some people will do that. They'll take and they'll key all of them moving the same thing, and then they just offset the keys. But it doesn't quite look right. All right, it requires an understanding. There's really no quick little cheat way. I mean, there are some cheat ways that kind of get you there, that kind of send you down the road, but you're not done. Okay, so it requires a sense of understanding. So these little things are things that I use to help me understand how to do it. Okay, I hope it helps you guys. This is stuff that's really, really difficult to do. This is the kind of stuff that a lot of people pull their hair out, and sometimes it takes years to get good at it. I wish there wasn't a way that was like that. But that's just the way it is sometimes. It just takes a long time to get it and understand it and apply it and not fight your way through it. But if you are fighting your way through it, maybe these little principles, these little tips will help you fight your way through it a little more intelligently, and maybe takes your frustrating time of test, tweak, test, tweak, test, tweak, maybe cuts it in half. Hey, if you save half your time on the test tweak, then I've done my job. All right? Well, it's a little hot here in my new home studio that I've built for my recordings. I'm going to have to get myself a better air conditioner for this room. But I'm glad you guys stuck with me. I hope this was helpful to you. And now we're going to move into another part. I haven't quite figured out which part I want to talk about yet, so I'm not going to tell you what it's going to be for VTS41 because I've got 2 or 3 things I could do, and I'm trying to figure out which one makes the most sense. So you'll find out next time. Till then, be good. Have fun animating. Remember, it's supposed to be fun. Animation's supposed to be fun. Shh. Okay. We're supposed to be fun, all right? Have fun doing it, and God bless.